Good evening, everyone. We're very excited to be here tonight. We're here with Dr. Mike, and this is a very exciting and anticipated time together. I just want to make sure, Elena, that we're set up. Yeah, very excited to be here with Dr. Mike. And the reason I wanted to share this opportunity with all of you is because Dr. Mike brings something to the table that's completely exciting and new and fresh, and something that he's been talking about for a really long time. Hey, Susie, we're excited you're here. Lots of people are joining in now. And Dr. Mike, I just want to go back for a minute and share with everybody a little bit about who you are and why we're going to learn so much from you tonight. So I've met Dr. Mike. I met him many years ago when I was at the Dr. Oz show, and you were working as a medical director supporting the show and providing a lot of the data and the research that went behind it. And this was after Mike had graduated with an engineering degree, a biomedical engineering degree. So you have an individual who was getting ready, or who was actually getting ready to go to medical school, but also had this engineering background. So if we think about how much of our health in today's climate is affected by science, but it's also affected by machine, it gets very, very exciting to be able to speak with somebody like Dr. Mike. Brooke, we're excited you're here. Thanks for joining. I want you guys to also start putting questions out as we start to go with this. But I'm going to let Dr. Mike speak. But before we go there, I just want to share a little story about sort of the passion that Dr. Mike has had around the microbiome. I remember many years ago when we were chatting a little bit about, like, what would we want to do to have the largest impact on people's health. And I remember you telling me that there were technologies that were developing where people could literally sort of test their gut health and their overall health by the amount of odor and the amount of gas that would be eliminated throughout the day. So maybe you could start right there, Mike, and then we could go on further. Up. I think your computer just...
Oh, there we go.
Good, perfect.
Sorry, can you repeat that last
Okay,
part?
The question, I just wanted you to speak, Dr. Mike, before we get into the fascinating research around the microbiome and what you've done personally. I wanted to share with a lot of people a little bit about what you were sharing with me many years ago when you were talking about there's literally science that can analyze the gas that we let out during the day and what that meant to you and why that fascinated you.
Absolutely. Well, Naomi, thanks so much for having me tonight. It's really an honor to be here. You're certainly my favorite wellness warrior, and I appreciate this opportunity. So the gases you're talking about, the microbiome produces gases because they are eating all the food that we're eating. They're seeing all the food that's coming by. They're seeing the chemicals that are coming by in our body and reacting to it. And so there are technologies that are not currently used clinically on the lower end of our body for gaseous production, but those gases can give us an idea of what kind of foods we're eating. On the breath side, so there's breath tests available for seeing what kind of changes in the microbiome are happening for overgrowth, for example. So yes, the gases that are produced are certainly an important part of seeing what our microbiome is doing.
Got it, got it. So Stephanie's saying live video isn't playing. Let us know if anyone else is experiencing that. Hi, Linda from Austin. I was just in Austin yesterday. Thrilled to have you here. A question for you, Dr. Mike. That's very interesting when we think about, you know, both our breath and the gas that comes out of our body. Tell us a couple of things about our microbiome that we may not know, that you know through the work that you do, and what we do need to know.
Absolutely. So the microbiome is the set of microbes or microscopic organisms like bacteria, viruses, and fungi that line the gut. So they are all over our bodies and inside of our bodies, but we're especially going to talk about the gut microbiome. So there's like a carpet of bacteria covering the end of your colon, And there are so many cells available there that it's 10 times the number of cells in your body. So the human body has about 40 trillion cells made of human cells. But you also have these guests in your colon that are not human cells that are 10 times that amount. So we need those because our body only has about 23,000 genes available to make proteins, to make structures, to send signals. But with the microbiome, we're now able to access over 1 million genes to make tons of different signals, to make compounds that help us digest. They make vitamins. They make tons of things that allow us to run a proper metabolism, to run a proper immune system. And when our microbiome is imbalanced, we can certainly lead to a lot of health problems, inflammation. So our microbiome is critical to good health.
And how much of our microbiome lives in our colon? We hear about the microbiome of different parts of our body. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, there's microbiome everywhere on our body, our skin, in our nose. There's microbiome in our genitals, in our guts, in our small intestine to some degree as well. In our mouth, there's an oral microbiome that affects our getting cavities, our breath. It also affects our gum health. Gingivitis and cavities are really caused by an imbalance of bacteria in our mouths that destroy teeth and gums and cause inflammation. That's the beginning of our gut tube. And at the end of our gut tube, we have the largest amount of bacteria covering our colon. And that's where the real business of microbiome science takes place. It's so much processing, chemical processing, sending signals all over our body that it almost acts like a second, an organ itself. It's almost like a pre-liver, so a second liver that processes the food before it even gets to the liver, because your microbiome sees everything that you eat and drink before your liver even sees it. And that's when your body can start reacting to the food that you eat, processing your immune system, and sending signals to your brain to tell your body to get ready for what's coming.
So we have a question here. Do pets have a microbiome as well?
That is a great question. Indeed, they do, and all mammals have a microbiome. The dog, cat, mouse microbiome is a bit different than the human microbiome in terms of the proportion of different species of bacteria and the abundance is there. But certainly, dogs need microbiomes as well to process the food that they eat, to process the signals that they need to run their immune system. And there are tests available for dogs as well. So it's certainly an important part of mammalian health in all species.
That's awesome. Very, very interesting. So we have this microbiome. Can you tell us a little bit about why really in the past couple of years, the understanding has started to increase so dramatically? Like, what's going on in the world of science that we're hearing so much about the microbiome?
Yeah, so true. I mean, 10 years ago, you hardly heard about the microbiome. People were more worried about keeping everything sterile and clean, and people were afraid of bacteria, thinking that they were all pathogens. And it really wasn't until the last 10 years that we really realized that there are very beneficial bacteria that are vital, that are critical, that are needed to help us balance out the bacteria that's good from the bad. There were a number of things that occurred. It's hard to know the exact cause, but one of the things is that there was a discovery of a new technology to identify the bacteria. So we used to have to culture them in a petri dish for days at a time, and it's hard to identify the bacteria that grew. And now that we have next generation sequencing devices, we can sequence an entire microbiome in a person, in a matter of hours and figure out who's there and what the bacteria are doing. So that technology, plus the interest in the microbiome itself, there was the Human Genome Project in the early 2000s, and then that was followed by the Human Microbiome Project. And so when we got the NIH and the White House behind the microbiome, there were a bunch of companies that came out trying to discover more about the microbiome, getting a lot of citizens involved to create a citizen science approach to discovering what the microbiome is. And it's really become an important, being in and of itself, but it was always there the whole time. So it's kind of funny and interesting. It was always there processing the food that we eat. Just now we're realizing all the damage that we've been doing in our Western society to our microbiome. So now that we have testing available to see our microbiome, we can start making steps to make improvements rather than just not being aware of what's going on in our microbiome.
Yeah, we really need to know this, like for all of us. And I think your point about 10 years ago when everything was sterilized, the impact that has on so many people's health. I mean, I can tell you growing up in Europe and then coming over here, my mother never believed in me using any of the, anti-microbial germ, whatever they're called. And I've never used them in my home. And I know that a lot of people do use them. And I've always just tried to stay away from it. But now we have such an epidemic in this country, especially with the overuse of antibiotics. So there's a great question here from Melinda. What is the best way to recover from taking antibiotics, Dr. Mike?
That is a great question. So antibiotics are a setback for the microbiome. Of course, if you're sick and your doctor prescribes you antibiotics, you should take antibiotics as directed by your doctor. But if you don't need antibiotics, I wouldn't strong arm your doctor into giving you antibiotics for a sniffle. I would be careful about the hidden antibiotics that are in the food supply. So if you're able to, try to get organic meats that aren't exposed to antibiotics. There are reasons they give cows antibiotics because it makes them fat. It kills all their good bacteria, makes it hard for them to lose weight, makes the cows bigger. But you shouldn't be ingesting those if you can. How do you recover? It can take a long time. It can take up to 9 months to recover a damaged microbiome in some cases. But the best things to do are to avoid further damage to your microbiome. So avoid exposure to further antibiotics, avoid exposure to refined sugars, too much refined flours and rich flours, because those feed the more inflammatory species of bacteria. And you can increase your fiber is probably the number one thing you can do, is increase your soluble fiber intake. Specifically, soluble fibers such as artichokes, chicory, onion, banana. Those fibers are incredibly powerful foods for our good bacteria. And when they eat those fibers, they produce beneficial compounds that repair the gut, make our metabolism work better, and really help us rebuild where we were before we had that insult to by antibiotics.
That's really interesting. So for those of you that says there's an echo, we're working on trying to get rid of that. I'm wondering if we need to mute one of the lines, but we're working on it, guys. So I apologize if that's occurring. Can you talk a little bit about other surgeries or other tests that have been done, that are done, and what that does to the microbiome as well? You had talked about that with me a little bit beforehand.
Sure. So there are, colonoscopy, for example, is a very common test that people have and that they should get when their doctor recommends it. Everyone's going to get one eventually when they're over 50. So for the prep of the colonoscopy, you have to do a pretty aggressive cleansing of your colon to get all of the stool out. And that process can remove, in a lot of cases, up to 90% of the microbiome of the colon.
Can you just say that again? I want everybody to say that again.
So the process of cleansing before a colonoscopy can remove, in some cases, 90% of the microbiome, the abundance of those species. It can reduce it by 90%. So, wow. In order to see, they need to get rid of all the solid material that's in there. So it's a necessary evil, but now we have to rebuild the microbiome after that insult as well.
So for all of you that are hearing that, for me, that was the very first time I had ever heard that. And I think, like you said, Dr. Mike, how many of us get one, after the age of 50, and really how incredibly impactful in a negative way this is to our health. So we're getting tons and tons and tons of questions, guys. I'm going to try to get as many of these answered from Dr. Mike as well. And also, if you have the questions and we don't get them answered now, our hope is that we can continue to connect with Dr. Mike. I mean, he's truly
absolutely
a leading, brilliant resource in this field. One of the people in the medical community that I personally admire the most. And I just feel so privileged, Dr. Mike, to have you here with us today and then talking about something that matters so much to our health. So again, you know, I was asking you, and I think a lot of people will be curious to hear this. I'm sure when you wake up in the morning, maybe one of the first thoughts you have on your mind is your own microbiome. And can you tell us a little bit what your thought process is?
Absolutely. I'm constantly thinking about my microbiome because, you know, we have all been working for years to build the microbiome that we have. You know, since birth, it sort of sets the tone for the rest of your digestive and metabolic life. So I try to make good choices. I'm not perfect, but I try to make good choices throughout the day to make my microbiome be as beneficial and strong as it can. So when I wake up, I try to get enough sleep, of quality sleep, because our microbiome has circadian rhythms, just like our brain and our human cells do. So they need to be exposed to sleep, adequate sleep as well. So I try to get 8 hours of high quality sleep. First thing I eat in the morning is usually high quality Greek yogurt with you know, live and active cultures like lactobacillus and bifidobacterium, because that's a great source of probiotics that I'll talk about in a bit. Probiotics, of course, are beneficial bacteria that are not present naturally in your gut. You have to eat them, and they're anti-inflammatory. And I also have blueberries in my yogurt because they're, you know, a source of some fiber, which our bacteria love to eat. And that deep blue color in blueberries and other colorful vegetables contain phytonutrients, or basically plant pigments, that also feed the good bacteria. And our microbiomes love plant pigments. So that's how I usually start my day every day, to try to keep my microbiome starting the day off with the right foot.
That's so great. So when someone has been on antibiotics, or when they've impacted their microbiome in a negative way, what are the first things, what are the 3 things that you would recommend we do?
Absolutely. So the critical thing that I think everyone doesn't get enough of is prebiotics. So probiotics are the bacteria that are not there presently that you need to add by eating, but prebiotics are the food for the bacteria that are in your gut. So that includes things like soluble fibers, like I mentioned. It includes things like oligosaccharides, such as XOS and GOS, that are available as supplements. And those, when fed to your bacteria in your gut, your commensal bacteria, or the bacteria that are already there during your life, they favor the good bacteria and don't favor the bad bacteria. So my number 1 tip is to eat more prebiotics. And the simple way to do that is to eat more soluble fiber.
That's great. Pierre has asked a couple of times to have you comment on polyphenols, and you were talking about the blueberries, but can you share with us a little bit of your thoughts, if and how they might relate to the microbiome?
Absolutely. Polyphenols, of which, yeah, the plant pigments are part of, you know, including resveratrol and the other phytonutrients, work as an anti-inflammatory power to, when the good gut bacteria eat those pigments, they favor the good bacteria, and they also nourish the gut barrier. So the wall of the gut protects the inside of our body, which is sterile and should not have bacteria, from the bacteria that are in the gut and from the food particles that are there. So phytonutrients nourish those cells of the gut and make a very strong gut barrier so that things don't leak into the body cavity. So a leaky gut is a whole nother topic, but a leaky gut can lead to inflammation and autoimmune conditions, and those are things that we don't want. So among the healthy fats, there's good food for the gut barrier. There's also the phytochemicals as a very good nutrient for that as well.
Very exciting. So for all of you that are watching, this is great. Fran, thanks for being here. We're just really thrilled to have you all. The reason I wanted to get Dr. Mike on with all of us was because of the water fast. And Susan
Yes.
was asking about that, right? So Mike and I were on the phone and we were chit-chatting a little bit about some of the amazing work that you're doing You had just joined the team at uBiome, and I was so thrilled to learn about it, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And right now, you're even at a microbiome conference at Duke University. Is that right?
I am. That's right. Yeah.
You're right on that cutting edge, and it's such a privilege to be able to talk with you. So tell us a little bit about how water fasting and the microbiome work together, and then why you decided to take a position as the medical director at uBiome.
Well, I'll tell you, Naomi, I was truly inspired by your docu-series to really try this 5-day water fast. I always eaten healthy. As a doctor, I tried to eat as healthy as I could, but I wanted to really find out if my gut was as healthy as I thought it was. So I did a microbiome test from uBiome and found that I did actually have to some degree, a dysbiosis, or it's a word that just means an imbalance of too much bad bacteria versus the good bacteria that I wanted. So what I did is I just hit reset. I wanted to really just find a new start to my gut microbiome process. So what I did is I did a 5-day water fast. So I didn't eat anything or take any supplements for 5 days. I just drank water, and it was certainly a challenge. First couple of days were painful, because you realize what hunger really is. I mean, hunger is when your carbohydrates are low, when your blood sugar is low, and you're kind of addicted in a sense to that sense of always having carbs available. So once I got through that painful process, by day 3, I started becoming more fat adapted, and that's when my gut microbiome certainly got more happy as well, because it doesn't need to be exposed to tons of carbs all the time. At least refined carbs, I should say. So by day 3, 4, and 5, I was starting to feel a lot more energetic. I was more sort of mentally sharp and alert. My mood was better. And what was happening on the sort of microbiome level was that I was essentially starving down the bad bacteria in the gut, because those bacteria are also addicted to the sugars and the bad things that we eat. I certainly enjoy chocolate chip cookies, and without eating anything, you don't expose those bad bacteria who love the inflammatory foods to anything, and so those levels go down, and it gives a chance for the good bacteria's levels to come up, because they're adapted to being without food for certain parts of time, because our bodies don't need to be fed constantly. They're able to withstand, when you're healthy, they're able to withstand certain amounts of fasting, and that's just a normal part of life.
So you took your uBiome test.
Right.
Before you recognized that you were in this state that you really didn't want your health to be in. Were you surprised that your microbiome was at that state, really?
I was surprised that I had that degree of imbalance to some degree, but then when I felt, I'm actually not on my game 100% right now. I could be sharper. I could have a little bit more energy. My mood could actually be better. And so then it kind of made sense. And then I realized this is a test that, anyone should be able to take and find out, I may be healthy by the numbers that the doctor says. My may be perfect. The doctor may, tap me on the back and say, we'll see you next year, everything looks good. But if you look deep into the microbiome, even if you think that you're healthy in the sort of traditional sense, there may be some level of low-grade brewing inflammation that should be discovered before really, resting on your laurels of being healthy. And so I did repeat the test. As you said, I did the 5-day water.
The 5-day water fast, and then after you had completed the 5-day water fast, you chose to repeat it. Tell us about it.
So I repeated the test, and my markers for what we call diversity, which is basically how many different types of species and distribution of species are there. We want that number to be high. We want the microbiome to be able to respond to all the perturbations of life. We want to be able to make lots of different types of signals, lots of different types of compounds. And so my diversity increased. It was low, it became normal. And I also had markers in the metabolic section that improves my metabolism. I had evidence of my metabolism actually improving. So it was, really eye-opening, and it really validated the water fast for me. So, it's a tool that if I get in a place where I really am just not metabolically or where I think I want to be, a water fast is a good way to kind of kickstart a microbiome change.
I love that for all of you. I mean, I'm sure that this is like completely new and exciting information, and it validates what we're doing. And so a lot of people are asking questions or talking about the importance of being fat adapted when you go into your fast. And one of the best ways I found to get fat adapted is to use MCT oil, but making sure that that MCT oil is clean and not processed from non-organic products. Just the same way that you were talking about the importance, if we're eating meat, that we're eating grass-fed, so that the hormone, we're not, getting these surprise hormones into our body and wondering why we're having that kind of impact. The same thing is with MCT oil, but using the MCT oil to help us become fat adapted before we go into the water fast.
Absolutely. The MCT oil is having high quality MCT oil is important because fats that we take in become signals. Those become hormones. Those become cell membranes. They become components inside cells. So we need to make sure that we're having a very pure, high quality fat when we're taking fats. MCT oil in particular is really special to the microbiome because it has an antimicrobial process that is somewhat selective to blocking the bad bacteria or the inflammatory bacteria, also fungi as well, and allowing feeding the good bacteria to proliferate. And fat metabolism is extremely important to the microbiome because the fibers or the complex carbs that the bacteria eat turn into short chain fatty acids as well. Those, along with the MCT oil, nourish the gut barrier that I mentioned earlier, which is the gut wall that protects our body from what's in the gut. So that nourishes the cells of the gut wall to make sure that that barrier stays strong. And that barrier is critical because we don't want anything to leak and cause problems inside the body that shouldn't be there.
Great questions. Really interesting, Dr. Mike. People are asking about the MCT oil. So what we're talking about is MCT is taken before you would go on the water fast. During the water fast, you're going to be drinking water, but it helps your microbiome, and it also helps you to become fat adapted so that you can benefit. And we're talking about MCTs from C8 and C10, not just C8, both of them. And we're also actually, even though they're not technically considered a medium chain triglyceride, we're also talking about the lauric acid, which is a C12, and the antifungal and the antibacterial benefits of that as well. So guys, we've got like 2 more minutes. Dr. Mike, can you just tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing, why you chose to work for uBiome, and share it with everybody, and we can add a link for the people that want to know more.
Absolutely. I realized in medical school that the microbiome was going to be an important force in medicine, in the cutting edge part of medicine. When I worked for the Dr. Oz show, of course, I met a lot of the leaders in the field of microbiome science and realized that it was really going to be a critical part of making healthcare better, making medicine work better for people, really bringing Western medicine to the next level. And when I learned more and more about the science, I was just further and further convinced that it was a good idea that I did order those probiotics for patients that I gave antibiotics to, that I that really studied up on what the microbiome could do for the entire body, for the metabolism, for our mood, for our heart health. The fact that the microbiome sends signals to almost every organ in the body, spoke volumes about what I wanted to do. So after my medical training, I did join the team at uBiome, and as part of the medical affairs department, and I get to work on making tests for the microbiome. And the uBiome's tests allow anyone at home to test at home their own microbiome and monitor it over time. So if they want to do a test of, let's try this intermittent fasting, let's try this new supplement, let's try this new diet or new exercise plan, we can show that with evidence that there's actually a change with the microbiome test. So the microbiome test showed me volumes when I did my water fast. And if I make a big change in my lifestyle, I always do a microbiome test to really document what actually changed.
That's so awesome. So I want to just say thank you so much, Dr. Mike. We're going to go and speak in another community now for the next half hour, but I just, for all of us and what we can do for our own health and our own microbiome, I appreciate this so much. We all learned something incredibly interesting and new, and I hope that all of you that had the privilege of listening to Dr. Mike, that you got a lot of your questions answered. And we've got a bunch of our incredible team on the line right now, so keep asking questions, and I'm sure that the coaches and the dietitians will be there to help. All right, good night, everyone.
It was an honor. Thanks so much. Thanks, everyone.